discussions, lectures, and interactive sessions. From the Fazana and NAMC award recipients to the NAZC 2014 honorees. We have such a talented community in North America filled with wonderful role models for adults and youth alike. And it was on full display over these past 3 days. I'd like to thank these individuals, too large to name individually for this half-hour presentation, or as this clock says, 17 more minutes, but to whom I know we are all extremely thankful and grateful. But one side note I'd like to make regarding this is that we need to figure out a way to give those on stage the attention and respect they deserve as they educate us, entertain us, or are recognized for their accomplishments. Whether it's figuring out better logistics, a more respectful and considerate audience, which you guys are all very much so, a combination of the two, or something else entirely, I think it behooves future Congress hosts to think about this issue as hopefully our North American Congresses continue to grow in both relevance and in numbers. And lastly, I'd like to thank Vera Santok, who single-handedly has accomplished something that both my parents have never been able to accomplish dragging me to Congresses, which is forcing me to pay attention by having me do this session. I don't think I've paid more attention to a Congress than I have for this one, having to stand in front of you to do this wrap-up. And I'd like to thank my wife, Perinaz, who, among other things, has helped me by attending all the other sessions that I couldn't make during this Congress and giving me the download. So with that, I'd like to start kind of going into what we did this Congress and identify some of the firsts that happened in California this year. I had a top 10 list, but people kept coming up to me adding more stuff, so I've tried to synthesize it a little bit better, so now I have a top 11 list. This is the first Congress, at least that I've been to, where we've had an earthquake during the middle of it. Yeah, see, I didn't even know that. There was an earthquake yesterday. Luckily, nothing broke. Number 10, I guess, going backwards. So number 10, we've had over 750 delegates, so definitely the largest Congress in attendance in North America, of which nearly 70% are under the age of 55. Obviously, that's quite different from our demographics as a community. Number 9, over 1/3 of our delegates have never been to a Congress before. And I'm not sure if that includes youth Congresses, but that's the statistic that was given to me. So 1/3, so nearly, I guess, 300. Number 8, we've had a relaxation room with carom boards and table tennis. This is the first Congress to do that. Number 7, we've had a Reiki group healing session, as well as assistance for the elderly. Number 6, a mini Congress for children ages 5 to 12. With a very successful, I'm being told, a very successful puppy party that's sort of competing for this event, and an ice cream social, which future Congress hosts may want to consider even for the adults, not just for the kids. Number 5, we've had a teen track for the 13 to 18-year-olds that was organized by Shazneen and by Shahrazad Rates. This was a first. I got to participate in it by moderating a session, and it was truly something inspirational to see a lot of 13 to 18-year-olds come and ask some really good questions. Number 4, a pre-Congress for the youth. I'm not 100% sure if this is the first Congress to do that, but at least in my recollection, it was much more organized, and there seemed to be a lot more activity regarding the pre-Congress for the youth. Number 3, this Congress has used a lot more interactive sessions. Based on the turnout of these sessions, future Congress planners may want to examine how best to balance lecture and panel discussions with interactive sessions so that there's a better discussion as well as engagement with our youth. And I've been told yesterday there was an impromptu session between Dan Sheffield, Johan Vivanya, and the youth that was organized at the last minute by Dinshaw Mistry, and that was extremely successful. It had the youth captivated for 3 hours, which, as we know, youth being captivated for 3 hours is always a challenge. Number two, we've had a very informative program booklet that also served as a mini bicep workout for anyone who carried it all 3 days. And last but not least, the thing that I found amazing, I shouldn't say amazing, but this was the first Congress where people from Toronto, Chicago, and New York all lamented that an outside temperature of 50 degrees Fahrenheit was cold. Okay, so now moving on to the themes of the Congress, and I'd like to caveat these themes by saying this is what I observed, sort of what came to my mind as I was hearing people and their comments, as well as sort of the comments that were out in both inside and outside the main hall. And some are a few suggestions for what organizers may want to continue or consider when planning their program for the next Congress or future Congresses. And the one thing, and the other thing, I'm not big on caveats, but the one other thing that I'd like to caveat is not everyone will agree on all these points, mainly because, you know, having 100% agreement on any issue is tough. But I'd say this is a good subsection of what the majority felt at this Congress, especially people my age and younger. This was the first Congress, I thought, in a very long time where we can claim that a lot less time was spent on trying to define who is a Zarathustri, okay, and much more time spent on how to build a community that is cohesive and accommodating, which, you know, kind of brought me back to what Mr. Godrich said at the start of this, of his opening remarks, where he recited his poem. He said, "A balm of tolerance gives immunity, allows enjoyment of faith and unity." And I thought this Congress did a decent job of portraying that and getting that point across. And it got me to think, you know, maybe this is just the natural evolution of how things go in a diaspora. As we get more comfortable in our new home, maybe, you know, our genetic code, always being on the move, allows us to adapt and to kind of step back and look at the bigger picture. And then, you know, perhaps also the issues that are going on in the homeland, namely India, they're so busy with their own problems that maybe their overreach or overshadowing of Congresses in the past have been lower this time. And also maybe as the first generation of people born in the United States take more prominent roles within the community, they're less concerned about what's going on in the homeland than maybe the people that migrated here to sort of feel like, you know, maybe there's a schism. In essence, North America seems to be growing on its own and perhaps separating a little bit from what's going on in India, you know, for good, because we are developing our North American identity. And while we still look back, as the Parsis did when they came from India, look back towards Iran for guidance, you know, the Indian Zoroastrians formed their own identity, and maybe that's what we're doing in the North American diaspora. The second thing that I sort of observed is that this Congress talked a lot about trying to separate out the teachings of Zarathustra or the Gathas from the religious traditions and practices and customs of the faith. And there's a lot of emphasis on using reason and analysis and thought to determine what's right. The concept of Asha was brought up repeatedly. But one thing that was mentioned, but not as strongly as maybe in previous Congresses and maybe we should spend a little bit more time on, is a comment that was made at the Young Mobed session yesterday, which is, while we as individuals, and I'm paraphrasing here, while we as individuals are asked to use our vohumana, or good mind, to further ourselves down the path of asha, there is an equally strong component of spirituality and energy that comes from traditions and practices of our faith. It was briefly talked about in general terms, but maybe future Congresses can look at the evolution of these practices, rituals, and traditions, and provide Congressgoers with more context and information regarding this issue, namely so that we always don't try to, not all traditions are bad. Not all things that, our forefathers did are things that we should not do in the future. Yes, the Gathas are important, but those traditions that have developed over the millennia, maybe we should examine them and see what is relevant and useful and important for practicing our faith when it comes to some of the non-reasonable sort of scientific issues that we face. Because religion is not all about reason, it's also a little bit about spirituality and sort of the energy and the vibes, and maybe future Congresses can explore this issue. This sort of leads to my next point, which is the lecture of Dan Sheffield and the Venture Philanthropy session by Fariborz Maseh, and that is the history of practicing Zoroastrianism. Everything has been evolutionary. I know that we like to think of the past. Everybody loves antiques. It's cute. We have them in our homes, and we look to the past. We're very nostalgic about the past as we get older, and we tend to romanticize it. And Fariborz Maseh said something that stuck with me. He said, "There is a genetic predisposition to love your culture, and by extension, romanticize the past, regardless of where you come from. But I pose to you that not everything in the past was so great. Like once we discovered how to make electricity, we did not want to go back and use candlelight. Once we got our smartphones, we don't want to go back to rotary dial. It's not 100% the equivalent, but it just goes to show that even though we can look to the past, it does not mean we have to do everything that our forefathers did, because times are different, and we need to seek out what it is that really is, ways of being a Zarathustri, practicing the Zarathustri life and the values, and then try to the extent, accommodate that and use that stuff in our lives going forward. And to this point, I would just like to make an observation. Words matter. When you speak about things, using the correct lingo or the correct terms matters. And people should be careful, about what they say and present it in a way that truly reflects their thoughts, because evolution does not mean total assimilation. Okay? Just because I'm up here saying we should think about evolving doesn't mean I'm saying we should think about totally assimilating and just practicing good thoughts, good words, good deeds, and basically having a North American, being another Western culture in North America. So my point simply is, let's evolve, but do it in the way that truly holds to our principles as well as our way of life. And we shouldn't see the two things in conflict going forward. Which leads to education, right? Quite frankly, all of this boils down to education to some degree. And quite a few sessions this Congress were devoted to educating us. Some sessions were more popular than others. The Zoroastrianism 101 session I heard was excellent and had a lot of people, especially young people, and even some adults, so that was great. There seems to be some desire for coming up with standardized education material, which is also great, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel association by association. There also seems to be a desire for more historical knowledge, as the conversation with Johan and Dan Sheffield proved by the youth. understanding the historical context of things, and also to prevent, quite often in a religious context, we often hear, especially young people, so-and-so said such and such. And you're like, okay, well, who's this so-and-so and what is this such and such? And is this so-and-so really an authority on what he said? And so you delve a little bit more into, okay, give me some more information. And quite frankly, usually it's like, well, I don't really remember, but this is what I heard. And I think with education, you get less of that and more knowledge that allows better decision making. And then there also seemed to be interest in learning about new discoveries and archaeological research that's been done since the previous Congress. So future Congress hosts should also think about some sort of panel presentation or description of current things going on in Zoroastrian research. But as with every education context or learning requires educators. And there was a fair amount of discussion about who is your primary educator. And I think consensus seemed to implicate or define that as parents. Parents are the primary educator within a community. They are the primary role model for children. But we all have to remember, children practice what they see, not what they're told to do. And that requires a lot of time and energy, especially when it comes to leading a Zoroastrian life, not to the extent of day-to-day living, but when it comes to passing on the education and the values, there's a huge time commitment involved. And I will throw out there that we spend as a community a lot of time and effort on education that's non-religious, making sure our kids go to the right colleges, the right schools, the right activities, that maybe some sort of balance needs to be put back into religious education, or at least treated equally with the other activities going on in a child's life. Because quite frankly, it's too late to lament about not doing those things when a child's an adult. It's better if we obviously start younger and spend the energy and time. This sort of led to what is the role of the community then? And I think the consensus when it comes to the role of the community is that the community should get away from being the enforcement. We're not the police. These associations aren't the police of who is Zoroastrian, who is not Zoroastrian, but really should be the showcase, to educate the community, to showcase the nurturing. What is a Zoroastrian life? Who are the role models within the community that you can help guide children and adults also to a lifestyle and a way of thought that is both informative as well as in true practice of the faith. That seemed to be where more or less where people were talking about where the community should fit in, less about the judgment aspect and more about facilitating the environment of knowledge and cohesiveness among members so that we all grow together and learn together and are unified together. And one session, the State of the Online Zarathustra, discussed a lot about the tools that we now have to make that happen, even though given our distance, given our sprawl, so to speak, there are now new technologies that we can use and utilize to make that cohesiveness happen, even despite our distance. As I mentioned earlier, there was a lot of talk about making religious education more interesting and taught in a more interactive way to engage the youth. And the only other point I'd make on this issue is, kids today learn math and science and all different techniques. And, what worked in the past doesn't work for those subjects or has been modified today. And so why shouldn't our religious education do the same? The way we used to learn it may not be the right way or as informative or as interesting to some of our youth. And, we can always say, oh, when I was your age, this is what I do. But ultimately, it is our objective and our end goal is what we're trying to do is get more youth to understand their religion, understand it, know what it's about, and also to be more steeped in the values of the faith, so that as they make their decisions in life, they return to Zoroastrianism and they return to the values that they were taught, so that their choices end up being the ones that we're trying to help them make throughout their life. And so ultimately, religious education requires good teachers. And just as, in school you try to shop around for a good teacher, maybe we should give some attention at future Congresses to developing good teachers within our community. Not just, it's one thing to have the material, but if you can't effectively communicate it and you can't sort of get children to be immersed in it, then all the good intentions of the world aren't getting the job done. I have two more items that I'm going to go quickly through. One is charitable giving. There was some talk with the WZO and Fazana, as well as other brief mentions about charitable giving. And one thing that would interest me, quite frankly, is how much, or when it comes to charitable giving, what are the tangible results of that giving? We don't tend to hear about those as much in terms of lessons learned and other items related to how far our dollars go to getting the charity work that we want done. There's also the issue of human capital when it comes to charity, and to this point, I would argue that there are a lot of local considerations that need to be placed in mind. It's great to hear what other associations are doing. This venue is a good opportunity to hear all that, but I think local associations need to take what they hear and then morph it into what works for their community, because when it comes to human development and human capital, a one-size model doesn't tend to fit everyone. The next item I have is our mobeds. The session yesterday was great about discussing young mobeds and the challenges and achievements they face, but I think, quite frankly, a larger discussion at a Congress is required on mobeds, how to balance and help them support their balance between career, family, and their religious responsibilities. Because, quite frankly, for a diaspora to continue and to flourish and to function, this issue is at least 50% of the issue. We can have all of the education of our religion and knowledge, but we need the ecclesiastical services. And without the mobeds, that ecclesiastical service will not be fulfilled. And, in India, we have an expectation when we go to the Agari or the Atishperam that there's a mobed that will perform this ceremony and that ceremony, but here it's all voluntary. And, one can say, oh, this is your duty to your community, but it's tough. It's tough to balance work, play, life, and community support for these mobeds is important, and it would be interesting to put that on the agenda for future Congresses. And then lastly, and I'll end with this one, is community togetherness. Time and time again, we always hear about Parsi and Iranis, our Trostis, and how to integrate us more, especially by youth. And I, as a youth, thought that, and youth, after me think this. But I am pleased to. I think we're getting better at this. I think there is definitely more unity than there was when my parents emigrated to the U.S. And that is both formal and informal through Z-camps and other social events. And the trend is definitely upwards. It may not be a continuous upwards, but there's certainly a trend upwards to being more unified, and I think that's great. Education certainly will play a better role in unifying us and getting rid of practices and beliefs that are more outdated and insular than we need for our community. So as with everything, whether it's matters of faith, community, unity, or any of the themes discussed here today, it quite frankly all begins with you. This Congress has provided lots of things for us to think about, reflect upon, and approve upon, both in our own lives as well in our collective lives. However, while it's okay to talk about what needs to be done, get done, and the like, everything begins with us individually. How do I lead my life? How do I volunteer with my time and my money? How much do I know about my faith? And how much can I help my community? As we close 2014 and begin 2015, and perhaps over a glass of champagne tonight, or if you're a Parsi, maybe 2 or 3, we should spend a little more time reflecting upon the example we individually set, and perhaps less time on the example that others set and our expectations of them. Our actions, our words, our deeds, these are all within our control and what we have to lead a more righteous life and a more Zatushti way of life. And hopefully through that control, we will collectively continue our success, our faith, and our unity in 2015 and beyond. With that, Happy New Year to everybody, from my family to yours, and see you next time.